Hi, my name is Joan Godoy, and I am a proud board member of the Women's Fund in Miami-Dade County. When I'm not doing that, I'm the CEO of Radical Partners, which is a local social impact accelerator that invests in leaders, engages locals, co-designs solutions, and builds coalitions so we can collectively strengthen our community. So I'm part of RP, I'm part of the Women's Fund. I also sit on the board of Philanthropy Miami. So I'm all about accelerating social impact from whatever perspective you want to see it. So my relationship with the Women's Fund started, I can't even remember, maybe 4 years ago. Gender equity has been in my core since I was born and raised in Guatemala. And I started engaging with the organization when they were hosting their Impact Collaboratives live. So that was a while back. But then 2 years ago, when my friend, mentor, and peer, Maria Mayer, took over the leadership of the Women's Fund, she invited me to rebuild the strategy and to rebuild what the Women's Fund was going to look like in Miami-Dade, right in the middle of a pandemic. So I joined the board in June, July of 2020, and I've been part of it since then. So it's beautiful to see not only how strategic and mindful we're being in terms of what we're doing for the sakes of women and girls in Miami-Dade County, but to also see how much the board has grown both in quantity and quality when it comes to the work that we're doing. What is it about our collective mission that most resonates with me? I think the collective side of things, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm all about investing in leaders and galvanizing locals and people around a certain cause. So the Women's Fund is the arena where we get to do that, very specifically when it comes to girls and women. So we try to identify who's doing what where and how can we not only know about each other, but collaborate with each other so that we're not competing, but we're actually filling the gaps and making sure that no matter where you're born in this county as a girl, that you have access to health, to education, to opportunities, and to economic mobility throughout the county. So that element of really mapping out and assessing what's out there and what's not, and what can we do to fill the gaps is what not only excites me, but challenges me in a way. I think one of my favorite anecdotes is a recent anecdote with Malia, who's the CEO of LEAP, a program for female entrepreneurs that are returning citizens after spending some time in prison. And the reason why I like that story so much is because Malia is one of our alumni at Radical Partners, right? So she was part of our leadership lab a few years back, and now we've seen her progress, the progress of the women that she supports. And she's, of course, also very involved with the Women's Fund as part of this network of badass women who are changing things for girls and women in town. And because she participated in a few of our civic engagement workshops that we gave at the Women's Fund, she was able to access hundreds of thousands of dollars from the county's budget. So I think it was somewhat of a full circle moment of like an alumni and a friend of ours was part of the Women's Fund. She came to our programming, and because of our programming, she had access to this big win. And because of this big win, she's doing more for women in Miami-Dade County. So that's one of my favorite anecdotes. And of course, I have a couple that involve some laughter and some dancing, but I'll keep those for the future. I think for me, being part of the Women's Fund, it keeps me grounded to my purpose of really investing in the power of girls and women. Gender equity has always been a part of who I am and everything that I do. But then at Radical Partners, right, in my social impact work, we work with an array of topics. So by being part of the Women's Fund, it keeps me grounded to placing women at the core, most importantly, women of color, who are still struggling with many of the inequities and disparities around the world. That's what it allows me to do locally, but also it's an opportunity to stay not grounded, but connected to the international world, right? What's happening when it comes to policies, what's happening when it comes to international initiatives that then trickle down to what's happening in Miami and vice versa. So this is, yes, an important cause for me, but it's also a source of knowledge and joy when it comes to advancing the agenda for girls and women around the world. So my vision for the Women's Fund in Miami-Dade in the upcoming years, it's already becoming a reality. 2 years back, we had no data in terms of who was doing what where. And over the past few years, we've accomplished that, right? In terms of mapping out the community, in terms of what the status looks like for girls and women when it comes to education, economy, jobs, etc. And also mapping out who's serving or who's trying to fill those gaps and what can we do around that to bring these people together so that we can think bigger and fill those gaps in a bolder way. So I think it's already being shaped. But if I get to dream of the future, I would dream of a strong and diverse board as we have it now, hopefully with more voices of women that haven't historically been represented in positions of power as that, and that our strong pillars of work all have tangible materials and resources that people can use to understand what the status of women and girls is in Miami-Dade County, what needs to be done and how they can be involved so that they can advance the 4 pillars and the agenda that we're trying to pursue with the Women's Fund. That I'm very proud of and that I will always remember, it was Power of the Purse in 2022. Power of the Purse has been a signature event from the Women's Fund, but then when the pandemic hit and the leadership changed, everything kind of paused, right? So it was until 2022 that we decided to do it in person. And it was a historic event. There were more than 700 people in the room, mostly women, with some allies in the room. So just seeing that amount of people invested in the power of women and girls in Miami-Dade County was powerful in itself. But I also loved how authentic and different the event was, right? The way we would set up the stage, how everybody from the board had a moment to come in and be celebrated, right? And then all the artists and all the women that were on the stage, I think were a tremendous reflection of the amount of power and talent that exists in Miami-Dade County, how many of them are still not recognized or paid accordingly to that power and talent that they hold. So it was just this tremendous celebration and recognition of all the women that live here and shape the city that we live in. So hopefully we'll get more than 700 people next year and that we get to be bigger and stronger every year until we're not necessary anymore. But while we're necessary, we're going to be here and we're going to keep showing up bigger and bolder.